Hi again. This is me again. So, I just finished talking to you about the Bible Recap podcast. That's my favorite. It's my favorite resource to in my walk with God and getting to know Him and loving the Bible more. So, the other podcast that I listen to, I've mentioned to you already the Don't Mum Alone podcast. Brilliant. But other podcasts that I love to listen to, Women of Worth, that's really good. Journey Women, Daily Grace. Sorry, I've got my notes here, so I'm looking into them. And these are kind of mainly for women. You know, they're women chatting or women interviewing other women, and they're focused on God's grace and God's work and women's ministry and just women's testimonies and their walk with God and sharing, you know, about their experiences and life happenings and testimonies and stuff. So that they are really good. They are really good, very encouraging. And for somebody like me who doesn't really have many friends around me in a like real life that I can talk to and share my Christian walk with, I just feel like I'm not alone listening to these podcasts. Another really good one is The Happy Hour with Jamie Ivey. Oh, so good. So good. Jamie Ivey is a wonderful woman. She's an author. She has obviously this lovely podcast. She's a wife. She's a mother to children by birth and by adoption. And she interviews loads of people, mainly women, but some men also. And again, they share about their testimonies. They share about, you know, their ministries and things that the Lord has helped them to overcome. Things like, you know, coping with, I don't know, divorce, coping with anxiety, coping with different mental health problems, with abortions, with judgment, and just so many things that, you know, us women get so wrapped up around sometimes. And I have to say that it's funny, which is really cool. I like Jamie Ivey's sense of humor. She's great. And again, it's something that just like refocuses me, you know, or turns my eyes back onto God and what's important and how to cope with things. So that's great. So that's Jamie Ivey. Sorry, The Happy Hour with Jamie Ivey. For a long time now, I've also been listening to this podcast called The Front Porch with the Fitzes. It's a podcast by a family of Fitzpatricks from America, from, I want to say, Texas? I can't remember. And they're just hilarious. I mean, they're not everybody's cup of tea because, I mean, if you can just imagine, you know, a mother and a father, two grown-up kids, and sometimes their kids joining in, talking just a load of rubbish, you know, they try not to get into politics, but they do sometimes. But a lot of issues, church issues, world issues, taking a mick out of things, you know, they recommend different things, shows, books, whatever. They talk about sports a lot as well, which is just usually just hilarious. One of the hosts, Joel. Oh my life. I think he's a pastor, but he's hilarious, and his sense of humor can be taken in different ways. You can either laugh with him and you can think, oh, what? Did that really come out of your mouth? Uh, but it's hilarious. But what I love the most about is that they usually talk about some serious issue as well. They usually have a guest on the podcast, which is a good laugh, but also a guest who will talk with them about things like abuse and things like human trafficking and things like the role of women at church. And they also are authors of some really good Christian books. And at the end of each episode, they do somebody leads a wonderful devotional, which they are like my favorite parts of that podcast. So the front porch with the Fitzies led me to another podcast, which is actually hosted by by one of their hosts, because the front porch with the Fitzies is, like I said, it's a family. It's Ellis Fitzpatrick, her husband, and then their kids, and sometimes their grandkids. And Ellis Fitzpatrick is an author. She has written many Christian books, wonderful books. And the latest one she wrote with a guy called Eric somebody. I can't remember who now. And the book is called Worthy: Celebrating the Value of Women. And from that book, or based on that book, they've created a podcast, which again will be like interviewing different people from church, mainly worldwide church, mainly America because they are American, but worldwide church, about the subject of women and the role of women, and not just in church but in society, in homes, as wives, as mothers, as in business and stuff like that. Because as we probably know that there's always been a big division between people at church about whether women should be functioning certain roles in society or in church, whether they should be preaching, whether they should be, whether they're only supposed to be teaching children, or just shut up and be quiet, basically, and all that. And it's great. It's really, it's really insightful. And they're huge advocates for, the worth of women and the value of women in general. So yeah, so brilliant. I recommend it a lot. Especially if you're a lady who's thinking, am I, what's my role? Am I allowed to pursue certain role in life, certain role in church, and whatever? It's really good, really good, really encouraging. Okay, so a couple of podcasts that I really enjoy that are related to worship, because as I mentioned before, I am a worship leader at my church. It's only a tiny little church, mainly elderly people at this church, but I love music. Music is something that I feel very connected to God through. And the first worship podcast that I listened to is the Worship Together podcast, and it's basically a group of, again, American mainly, worship leaders get together and talk worship. You know, they talk about all aspects of worship, you know, from spiritual and individual walk with God to relationships within the worship group, within the worship group. Sorry, can't get my tongue right. To practical things like you know, the cables and whatever technical things, and you know, resources and software and songwriting and lyrics, and you know, just brilliant. And again, there's usually a lot of guidance for worship leaders. I mean, I love it because they interview a lot of worship leaders and songwriters that I kind of look up to and listen to, and I find it really helpful. And also I find it helpful to like you know, it helps me to stay like relevant and current in what new worship music is out there. But also they of course put a big stress on the fact that every worship leader is only as good as their relationship with God, personal relationship with God. So so that's really good, and again, it helps you to refocus and recenter yourself. And they also interview different worship leaders from all over the world. You know, they have some wonderful episodes with, you know, interviewing people like Chris Tomlin and Tim Hughes and Matt Redman and all these wonderful people who've kind of started this whole like worship revolution back in the day. And that podcast led me to another podcast, which is just lovely. It's called Glorious in the Mundane, and it's by Christy Nockels. She's the host of Glorious in the Mundane. She's a songwriter, a singer, wonderful musician. I have a couple of her albums, usually playing in my car, and they're just heartwarming, heart melting, and always make you feel so precious in God's eyes, you know. And she also has a podcast where she doesn't really sing, but she talks a lot about her journey in finding the glory of God in the everyday things, everyday little things, you know. And again, it's one of them that just, I love to listen to it in the evening because she has such a soothing, warm voice that you just want to, you know, cozy up in a blankie and just get to sleep. So yeah, I think that's it. I do follow some YouTube channels, but they're more like beauty related, really, you know, makeup and skincare and stuff like that. And I do follow quite a few Christian YouTubers, which is really nice. The one person that I would highly recommend for you to find on YouTube is the lady called Cheryl Broderson. She's brilliant. She's a very, very good Bible teacher, and she also has a program. I don't think it's on a podcast. I've never seen it on a podcast, but she has a series of videos on her YouTube called Living Grace. And honestly, so good. again, in each episode, they're only like 30-minute episodes, and she interviews women who just testify of God's grace in their life, which is awesome, because I don't think there is much more encouraging. There are many more encouraging things than listening to somebody's testimony and how God, overcomes obstacles and illnesses and addictions and all these weaknesses and struggles that we go through every day. And there are some fabulous, full of miracles stories that are just like, wow, what a God we have. So I think that's it for my recommendations. Yeah, it turned out to be a really long video again, so definitely gonna split it into two. So thank you for listening. If you can, please subscribe, maybe share these videos with somebody who might find it useful, to find some resources to start their journey with God, or start to improve their walk with God and find out more about Him. So I'll definitely be posting some more songs. I've recorded a song today that I'll be posting in the next couple of days probably. I'm sorry that I've been away for quite a bit, but I've had a lot going on. I've spent a couple of days in bed with almost broken back after I've painted the fence for a whole day, and just other things. The quarantine means that Oliver is home all the time. I don't really get much peace and quiet to sit down and record something. I am hoping to do a live stream worship next Saturday I want to say 17th of May. I could be wrong, but that's going to be on my Facebook. I haven't quite figured out how to do it on YouTube yet. But if you would like to join me for some live worship and just, nice time singing together, then head over to my personal Facebook, Anya Jackson, that's it. And I'll see you there. So again, please like, comment, subscribe, and share if you can. Awesome. Thank you for listening. Bye.